certified Deutsche Telekom radio, the platform's somewhat irrelevant. We want to test it to make sure you're not doing anything that's wild and unique. And so they want to have some degree of control. But then the fact that they've gone out and put MVNOs in their network, they're starting to hire new distribution channels, they're making provisioning a lot easier, they're distributing that out to the market as opposed to holding it all at the home office. They're making it a lot easier to get around the world.
T-Mobile?
T-Mobile is still kind of getting on board of the whole.
Deutsche Telekom in Europe.
Deutsche Telekom in Europe, but Deutsche as a property globally, even in their roaming networks, is beginning to distribute this philosophy around the world, and it's making it a lot easier to go do this thing you're talking about. I don't know that, when we talk about the acquisition of Enphase and what that did for Verizon, or all these disparate methodologies. I don't know if you saw this, but Telit just recently acquired Crossbridge. So now you're taking, where Crossbridge is that.
Telit's the Canadian?
Telit is the Italian M2M module OEM that builds the cellular M2M modules. They just acquired Crossbridge. So now you've got the provisioning, SIM management, SIM distribution, and all that right next to the module. And now when you go through the certification process, you're sort of getting a package deal from Telit, so that radio can now go out and is market ready, all the way down to the SIM being provisioned and the product being ready to go out the door. So I think where we're at, as an Intel standpoint, is how do you design platforms now, right? So what's that ingredient platform design methodology that allows you to capitalize on that capability and that direction that's being built in the marketplace, so that when companies want to go out and build a connected platform, the learning on that and the steps on that have already been thought about and managed, and there's a process to deliver it. So you don't have to do it, we've already done it, and that's in fact what we're doing with Wind River right now when you look at the feature set. That whole operating system, all the drivers, all the communications, all the stuff, we have it certified from the radio through the platform into the cloud service all the way out to the service provider itself, certified off the shelf, ready to go, completely integrated, done. All you got to do is pick it up and go build your application on it.
Thank you.
Since both Cisco and Lilee also have had some other run-ins with carriers, John and Barry, do you want to add on to this this question?
Yeah,
I know from Lilee we face it. So
I'd love to say something as an equipment manufacturer. We build equipment. You go down on the exhibit floor, you'll find it, that have multiple cellular carriers built into a single piece of equipment. And why? It's because you can't guarantee that anywhere you go you have one single cellular carrier, so you need to have multiple cellular carriers. But the nightmare in going from doing a good engineering design and then interacting with somebody like the Sierra, Centurion, Telit, or Novatel, and getting their product, and then getting it into your system, and then having to go through the hoops to get it allowed to be used, even though it was already a pre-certified device, to be allowed to be used on a carrier's network is a real challenge, and it's a difficulty for us as equipment manufacturers, because hey, we were promised that, well, this is just a phone, a data modem, and it's already certified for use on Qualcomm's or Verizon's network. Why can't I just plug it in and sell that device? That is a real challenge. And it sounds great that there are starting to be efforts within some of the larger, more forward-thinking carriers that it's time to start stripping away some of those layers of complexity. Because if we are going to be able to take advantage really easily and without having to have a PhD in PTRB, of cellular communications, which really are ubiquitous in so many cases, we need to make that a much simpler process for us as manufacturers. Yep.
So I'm going to take your question, and then we'll take yours after his. Can you please state your name and your organization?
My name is Reza Sherkat. I used to work with many of the chip makers like Broadcom and these people, and now I have my own company called Global Signal and System. So I have a question related to first clarifying my understanding that you mentioned there is some carriers like Deutsche Telekom that working on making this simpler. But what about the US market? Is this Verizon, Qualcomm things also going toward that direction? And my second question, which was my main question, then if I build a device which is in home and it's kind of supposed to be one of these machines, am I going to be like deal with Verizon as a different device than my mobile or whatever? How these things, let's say if I have 10 different devices or 5 devices or 4 devices, how this is going to be played from the point of view of to be charged and all those things? For example, if I'm building something for, I mean, that's my question for home use.
So to make sure we understand your question, the different devices, since they're different than cell phones, how does machine-to-machine address the billing questions of data usage?
Yes, that's it.
I can take a stab at some of the elements of that.
So can we first cover the first part just to clarify that part between Dutch and Verizon?
Oh, you're asking the U.S. carriers.
So the U.S.
doing
carriers, I think you'll
To
see.
make it simpler.
I think you'll see T-Mobile just by nature of the acquisition, probably begin to adopt some of the characteristics of Deutsche Telekom, but they're not all the way there yet. They're still requiring a certification, but it's not as onerous or lengthy or costly as it is to go do it on, say, a Verizon network or an AT&T network. And I don't see much movement from them yet when you look at the other carriers in changing their process, though they know they have a problem and that there's an issue in rate of adoption based on their procedures and policies.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Pete.
Well, just to touch on some of the aspects, if you're building, for instance, a home gateway there, you've got so many different things that you have to deal with. And what you saw earlier on the Wind River slide, for instance, you might have noticed the TRO69 protocol, secure remote management of that and two-way management of that. That's one of the many packages that will be added into a platform like this. You know, in the olden days, you bought a chip, and then you went and tried to figure out how to program it. And you know, we know those days are long gone. So you'll be out there shopping for a reference platform and for as much of the provisioning and the APIs as are relevant to your space as possible. And then you'll work on your customization of that. You'll work on adding your IP on top of that. So this is what I was talking about, is, you know, buying the Lego blocks instead of, you know, the plastic to build the Legos like the old days.
I think another element of your question, though, is are the carriers understanding that the rate plans that you need to go address the M2M space may be different than the ones required to put my data plan on a cell phone?
They're
The answer-
dramatically different.
Yeah, and the answer to that is absolutely they understand that. And depending upon the type of deployment you're doing, 2G, 3G, 4G, you have different rate plans based on that, and they're totally dependent on your bandwidth, the amount of data you're moving, how often you move it, et cetera, and so forth. So there's rate plans all the way down from $1 or less up to, you know, $50. It depends on what you're doing and what you can negotiate and what your volume is and a bunch of other things, and whether services you're consuming beyond just the network access itself, so the data plan. So they're beginning to understand the M2M space is not a consumer subscription space, and they're adopting accordingly.
Not the consumer, or
It's not. They understand it's a different business than the consumer data plan business.
The Kindle Verizon is an example.
Yeah, the Kindle, by the way, is a great example. You don't pay any data plan for the Kindle. Zero, right?
You pay somewhere hidden in there, but you know, it's
Well-
completely different than if you're, you know, buying a Verizon smartphone.
Yeah, so they in the Kindle, there's a limited ability for it to be a full function network device. It only delivers books and periodicals. So, you know, the carrier is getting a percentage of the subscriptions and the purchases, and they get some percentage of the Kindle itself when it gets sold. So it's a completely different, it's a subsidized model built on consumption, not a rate plan model that the consumer has to bear. So they're going to be really creative.
We have a question here in the front. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Harsh Verma from R Systems. We are a global software company out of Silicon Valley. And Barry and Rick, you and all the panelists have talked of the standards approach and intelligent systems framework and the sandbox. And we heard the carriers, and luckily there are no carriers out here right now, but
I think they're gonna hear anyway.
Carriers
Unfortunately.
having their own APIs for M2M, and then there would be issues of interoperability, how do things, Internet of Things, interoperate with one carrier versus the other carrier. So, I mean, would you have some thoughts of maybe setting up an intelligent systems sandbox in Silicon Valley, you're all Silicon Valley companies, and invite the carriers to participate in that, so that now AT&T and Verizon and Vodafone's are now having the onus of coming and participating in your sandbox and seeing that they make things work as well and interoperate, rather than smaller companies participating in their sandboxes and their M2M innovation centers and something like that, So, any thoughts on that? Just
like a consortium approach, is that what you're recommending?
yeah, it's maybe like a consortium.
Are you
approach
aware
in
that those
Silicon
carriers
Valley.
have their own innovation centers?
They do
Sprint
have,
has
yes.
one in Burlingame,
The
AT&T
Foundry
has
down
one
in
in
Texas.
Atlanta. No, for exactly this
Yeah.
purpose. They have different innovation centers for different applications, but I'm referring to M2M.
Right.
Exactly, and then someone participating in Verizon's innovation center has to see now how do they make things work in AT&T's innovation center.
You're calling
and
for
then
some consortium approach.
But yeah, this is where the Silicon Valley companies could invite the operators now to participate in something like an innovation center, M2M, Internet of Things sandbox or an innovation center over here.
And mediate the standards, I guess.
I think it's a great idea.